Welcome everybody to, this is session 4 of our annual professional preparedness workshop, where we offer assistance and support and tips and advice on how to initiate your job search process. So today we're fortunate to have Mimi, our Executive Director of the Architecture Department, join us. And today, I think in a way, is probably the most valuable body of information, where we give you advice on how to prepare for the interviews, the kinds of questions to ask at the interviews, and in a way, even more importantly, how to keep your job once you get hired. So without further ado, Mimi.
Thanks, Karen, and welcome everyone that's here and online or watching. I'm going to talk a little bit first about keeping your job, because I'm an educator but also an employer, and I have had my own firm here for the last 20 years in San Francisco. So we're obviously constantly hiring, interviewing, so it's a sort of a continual process. And so I think sort of demystifying that process, which you guys are going to do a little bit later, is really valuable, as well as just talking about how to keep your job once you get it, right? So you've gone to all this trouble to have a portfolio and an interview, and now you're here in the office, and how do you do that? And I think the first thing I want to say is keeping your job is first of all a state of mind, okay? It's really about being curious, being a team player. And it doesn't matter if that's a big or small firm. Be ready to take on any task with a positive attitude, and be proactive. Be proactive. Be proactive. Okay. So it's really starting with your attitude and basically the attitude you walk in with into the office. I have a kind of top 10 list, although I think I added one, so it might be 11 now. But I'm just going to sort of run through those. The first thing you need to do is bring value to the team, right? You have to come in bringing value to an office, otherwise there's really no point in having them hire you. You need to think about making yourself indispensable. And how do you do that, right? Especially as a person coming in right from school and you don't have experience before. Well, the first thing to do is know your skills, know what you're bringing to that job, okay? And I want to say know what to volunteer to do, in quotes. So as an example, you're sitting in a staff meeting on a Monday morning, and everyone's sitting around and talking about what they're going to accomplish that week and what the projects are. And let's say your supervisor, in the description of what needs to happen for him or her that week, says, you know what, we need to create a flyer for a community meeting that's coming up in a week. And you think to yourself, I know InDesign, I could do that. Raise your hand, right? Proactive, jumping in, saying, hey, I'd like to do that, okay? That's when people start to recognize, I could count on that person. That person's going to take something off my plate, right? And it's going to make my life easier. I want that person on my team, all right? Way to think. Second thing I want to tell you is every task has a deadline. Doesn't matter if it's small or big. Every single task has a deadline. It's really important you ask your supervisor what that is. It might be an hour from now, it might be 2 weeks from now, but you better know it, okay? So if you know that deadline, and if you think, oh my gosh, I can't do that in time and I need help, then that's the time to vocalize that, right? Don't walk away from taking that task without the proper support, all right? So know your deadlines, okay? Take notes of everything your supervisor asks you to do. This is number 3. And don't leave the conversation with that supervisor unless you're clear about what it is you're being asked to do. If it takes a little extra time, your supervisor, I guarantee, will appreciate that you're asking questions. Because if you leave thinking, I know what to do, or I think I know what to do, but you really don't, and you have to come back to that person later, they're probably going to be annoyed. Like, why didn't you ask me this the first time? So take the time right then to make sure you know what that task is. Okay, so don't leave the conversation without that understanding. Number 4 is related. I like it when people who are working with me will repeat back what I said, ask them to do, just so we're all clear, okay? So you heard something, you took some notes, and before I leave, I'm going to say, let me just go back over that with you and make sure I've got everything, right? So the fact of actually repeating it back to someone makes you really check and see, did I catch everything, okay? And then that might actually trigger some more conversation with them for clarification. So make that a habit, right? Repeat it back. Email. I want to talk about email for a second because a lot of our communication these days is email. Sometimes people will send a lot of things via email but not actually follow up to see that the person they send it to got it. It's really, really important as your own process to send something out but make a note to self, I'm going to check in a couple hours or the next day, whatever that time frame is that seems appropriate, and make sure they got it, okay? Because if you don't, then there's, again, that's eating up against your deadline. You think something's happening and it's not happening. And then it's probably going to make you a little stressed out to try and, catch up, okay? So always follow up on your email. Can be a follow-up email, can be a call, either way, right? Just to confirm that you've given them what they asked for, they've received it, and they can do what they need to do, okay? 6, I would say don't assume it's okay to wear headphones and earbuds, okay? Many offices don't do that because they want open communication. They want people hearing what other teams are even talking about, even if you're not on that team, because it's part of a sort of horizontal education in the office. So always ask first. You may be on a real crazy deadline and say, I know what I'm doing this very singular thing, and then I've had staff ask me before saying, I'm working on this rendering. Is it okay if I just tune out for the next 2 hours or something? Fine, do it, because that helps you focus on a specific task, but always ask, okay? Make lists. We're all multitasking like crazy these days, right? I'm a major list maker. One of the web-based project management tools I use and I highly recommend is called Trello. It's free, Trello. It's free. It enables you to share a Trello board with your team members. So everyone can access it wherever they are, on a phone, on a computer, and you can basically create tasks and assign it to people. And then people can go back in and say, I accomplished that, but here's a new question. So there's a kind of a constant feedback loop. And it allows you then to also close out things and let other people on your team know that you've accomplished that task, okay? So that's really valuable these days, I think. I'm sure there are others in terms of web-based project management, but Trello is the one that we use in our office, and everybody loves it because it's super simple. Then, and like I said, it's free, and you can scale it up or scale it down. You could even use it for your studio project right now. You could say, I know what I need to do. I'm going to create my own Trello board, and these are the things that I'm going to make sure I don't forget to do. My instructor just told me, don't forget to draw that stair section or whatever, right? Get it on that Trello board so you know, all right? This is number 8. If you want to go to a client or consultant meeting for exposure, right? You're thinking, gee, I'd love to get out of the office, or I'd like to go to a site visit, or I'd like to do something that's not at my desk, right? And you hear about that. You hear, so-and-so's got a client meeting coming up. Chances are they're not going to take you unless you, again, have a job in that meeting, right? Generally, meetings, everyone at the table at a meeting has a purpose for being there. So what I've seen younger people do, and I think it's very smart, is say, I'd like to go and I want to be the note taker. You've got a job now, right? You may not know what the conversation's going to be about, but you better be a really good note taker and then actually create those meeting minutes. Again, you're taking something else off of your supervisor list of things to do. It actually makes the person who's going to the meeting, who actually has to present something, it's much easier because then they can focus on the conversation and not so much about having to take notes. So that's, again, proactive state of mind, right? How can I get to that meeting but do something in it, right? What can I do? So that's another, I think, really important way to be thinking. Number 9 is, you've really got to watch sort of how your supervisor works, how they communicate and how they work. And if you can, will take a little time. It won't be the first, day or week or even month probably that you're on the job. But over time, you see how people work. You see their processes. And to the extent that you can try to preempt what they need is going to really make you valuable to them. So I'm going to give you an example. So for instance, I say to someone on my team, we're going to make a site visit to X tomorrow. The wrong answer from my team member is, okay, and they walk away. Okay, I got that, and they walk away, right? The right answer is, okay, why are we going to the site? What drawings do I need to bring? Do we need a tape measure? Should I grab the camera? Long list, right? How am I now helping you organize for that site visit? I'm going to take that off your plate. I'm going to make sure we've got everything we need when we walk out the door, okay? So again, it's sort of like trying to think ahead, take something off of someone's plate that you know you can do. Again, starts to make you really valuable to that person. My number 10, I probably have 20, but I'm trying to keep it short today. Number 10 is never leave the office at night without knowing what you're going to be doing for at least the first 2 hours of the next morning. Okay? The reason for that is your supervisor or your team, they may all be doing something. They may be on another deadline. They may not even be around. So if you finish what you needed to do by the end of that day and you walk in the next morning and sit there and go, what do I do now? No one wants to deal with you, okay? So it's much better that night before you leave, before your supervisor leaves, say, I'm about to finish this task. Should I do X tomorrow, or do you have something else in mind for me to do X? So when you come back into the office, you can just jump on it. And I say the first 2 hours because usually people are coming in and need to deal with their own issues with email and other phone calls and stuff like that, and they usually become free in an hour or so to be able to kind of check in with you, okay? But don't assume that they're going to be waiting for you when you walk in to tell you what to do next.
And I think it's also important because I think oftentimes students are new to keeping track of your time. So meaning, this team member, so the 2 hours, let's say, they're sitting there idling their thumbs, going on social media. Well, that's 2 hours that the office can't bill, right? So you've just wasted the company money. And so I think that idea is something that will help so that it's not just your time now. Your time is now going towards, so Mimi is paying you to be in her office. And so during
not
that
on
time,
social media.
Not on social media. So the time that you have in the office, you have to be productive, meaning you have to be able to account for, okay, I did this task, and now that task can be built to this client or this project number. So I think helping your supervisor manage your time by being proactive and say, so the comment about the 2 hours in the morning is an excellent one. So that's a way to proactively make sure that your time is productive and billable.
And again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about knowing deadlines, right? So it's really key that sometimes supervisors don't offer that information. They may be in such a hurry, they're just saying, hey, draw that section and I got to run, right? In their heads, they're like, I need it by 4 o'clock today, but they haven't said that to you. So that's why it's so important to ask. So if they come running back in going, okay, where's that section? And you think, oh my gosh, they never told me they needed it today. I was planning to get it to you tomorrow. Right? So that communication is so key to make sure the expectation is shared, right? So I think that's really important. Timekeeping is another really important thing because sometimes offices don't want to share like maybe what the fees are, right, for a project. That not all staff necessarily knows that. But I think it's fair if an office doesn't want to tell you what they're charging the client, that's fine. But they should also have an expectation with that deadline to say, we think this should take 4 hours. We think this should take the next week of this group doing this or you doing this, right? And that way, again, there's a kind of expectation, and then they're probably saying that because they know actually what the fee is, and they know sort of how much time and what your billable rate is to sort of make money on that, to be quite frank, right? I mean, this is a business, so they're going to be looking for you to do something in a way a timely way that's good quality and accurate, but also, you know, allows them to make money at the end of the day. So that's important. Your time tracking is really important. And we have time cards. Everyone, even me, we all fill out a weekly time card. And that's partially not to go back to anybody and say, you took too long on this. That's really not the point. The point is we see actually how long it takes. Excuse me. We trust everyone's working at capacity and, you know, trying to get the job done. But we could have underestimated. We could have easily said, that thing's going to cost us $10,000 to do. And then we do it. We do it because, you know, we want the highest quality for our client. Then we run the time and we go, oh, it's actually a $15,000 job. Helps us the next time, right? So again, the time tracking, the honest time tracking is really important to a business. So just something to keep in mind. Excuse me. The last thing, this was number 11, was, again, you can do this during an interview or, you know, when you are hired and first start, but you should talk to your supervisor about licensure, the path to licensure, and about the AXP. Most employers, I think, if in a firm, if your employer's not really interested in you doing that, I'm not sure you want to be there, quite frankly. So I think it's a very legitimate question. I think most employers are very interested in helping new designers to that path if that's what they're interested in doing. It's one of the questions we ask every interviewee coming into our firm. If they're not licensed already, do they intend to do that? It's important to us. That's if they say no, we might think, well, maybe we don't. Maybe that's not the right person for us, because we really want people to be in pursuit of that professional license, and we want to help them get there and grow to that level of responsibility. It's important.
And I think in general, you know, like two questions come to mind. So I think oftentimes as, you know, interns or, you know, as your first permanent job, you feel disadvantaged because you feel like you don't have a lot of leverage and maybe you shouldn't be choosy. So it's tricky, but you should be discerning and selective. And so, you know, questions like that, if their response is, oh, you know, we don't promote that or support that in our employees, it should be a red flag, to be honest, right? And you should come back and reach out to your mentors, your faculty, you know, somebody that you trust. You know, I asked this question, this is the feedback I get, you know, what would you recommend, right? It could be clarification, you know, further, you know, a more detailed question, or maybe they meant that there's a, you know, you have to be at the company for a certain number of years, you know, so that there's an investment. So it could be any number of things, but so the things to watch out for is one. And then the other is, so the licensure. So there are many, many ways to you know, be in this profession. That's true. But the licensure in general is something that, you know, us as a profession, we want to promote. It has, you know, political reasons. It has, you know, reasons beyond that particular office. So in general, the philosophy of all practicing architects is that as more people become licensed or they pursue that, the better it is for everybody in the profession. So I think, you know, the questions, and that's why firms promote. They might sometimes, you know, help you, you know, offer time off, or, you know, cover some of the costs, or help you find a study buddy in the office. So there's a larger goal, like beyond the billing rates or what's good for this company that people are thinking about.
Like the other aspect as an employer, when they hear that you are interested in pursuing your own licensure, is that they really understand a sense of goal making that you personally are projecting. So you have a set of ideas of where you want to be. And that's always helpful to know that a young professional individual has a set of challenges even beyond school. There is life beyond then this academic framework that is in this professional framework. You've made this investment in your education. This is then the investment into your professional and future life. And I often find that even in very large companies, licensure becomes an aspect of little bonuses. I mean, there are carrots, you know, at the other end of the stick that become incentives, but the real incentive is your career, that you're showing to your employer, I'm very serious about this profession. I'm going to continue, and I'm going to take this licensing exam and the path to it, and I want to contribute. And it sends that kind of message as well.
And also when we put people at a slightly higher level into a project management role, and they're meeting with clients, clients want to know that that person is licensed. Even if that person has been working for 10 or 15 years and may have all the knowledge, it's a perception, right? It's a client perception that you don't have all that knowledge unless you're licensed. Right or wrong, it is what it is.
It is credentials.
It's
right?
credentials.
Yeah.
So it's really important that when we need to elevate someone to a next echelon of responsibility, that they're either really close to the licensure and going to get it soon, or they have it.
And I think that's very common.
Yeah.
So because it is a credential that's externally recognized, and the firms want to encourage this, they often hold it as a condition for promotions,
Right.
or raises.
Right. That's very true. So back to the AXP and having a supervisor in the firm, which is really important, and again, knowing that the firm is going to support you in that effort. As Karen mentioned, it does give you leverage. I know coming into a firm as a new and young employee, you probably feel like you don't have leverage, but in fact, the AXP system provides that leverage, because if they're serious about sponsoring you, mentoring you through that process, they know that you need exposure to a variety of tasks, right? A variety of phases of work. And so if you spend the first year doing construction documents, great, you're capturing those hours for the AXP. But if that's all you do and that's all they're going to assign you to, you're going to then need to raise your hand and say, can we go over my AXP record? I'm pretty close to finishing my construction document requirement, and I want to finish the job I'm on, but can my next role be over here or in this capacity, right? So it's giving you the power, in a way, to then work with them to help get your next assignment, okay? And that's really important, that you don't get kind of pigeonholed into one thing, which is sometimes can happen, because gosh darn it, you're really good at that. Right. I'm just going to keep you doing it.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
So it really is, it's better for you to really stay on top of that and, be in contact and say, I'd like exposure to X next.
I think especially for entering young employees, young interns, it's the software skills. Because oftentimes you guys may be in the minority. You get really good at using a certain kind of software or creating a certain kind of drawing or rendering, and you may be bringing that as a tremendous value to the office, but you also have to watch out for, without AXP, it's really easy for you to take on all of the rendering tasks for all of the projects in the office.
And do only that.
Yeah.
And do only that for years and years. So IDP, AXP wasn't required in California until when I was around. It was optional, and I saw my friends do that. So then when they look to, now I want to be licensed, I'm thinking about this, and they're now years behind their peers, right? Because they haven't accrued the experience in the diversified field.
I'm supervising 2 of our junior designers in my office right now. And we meet quarterly. So they send me their reports, obviously, through NCarbon. I know what they're doing, so it's easy to verify. But we meet quarterly, every 3 months, to sit down and look at the record holistically again and say, all right, where are you needing that time? What are you on right now? What's the schedule to keep you? Because we need you still on that team for another month. But when that comes up, then we're going to look to see, how do we get you that schematic design, or how do we get you into a community meeting, or whatever it is that needs. And that's what you want to also promote if your employer doesn't do it. Okay. So
what I heard from a recent grad, I think to Mimi's point about that part, when you're in a specific part of your project, let's say it's schematic design. So one of our students who recently graduated took not the site planning part of the exam. He started his exam now. He took the schematic design and passed that. But then he took the site exam right after, thinking, I'm
on a roll.
And it didn't work.
Yeah.
So I think the good thing about AXP is it does help you to stay focused on that particular part of the exam segment that you're taking, and especially construction drawings, which I know 2 of our graduates are now studying for that. And they're ready. They're ready because they've gone through the mock exams already, even like with Archie Wu here, and they've gone through those exams with the AIA. So I think those are really, the AXP is really organized in that way. I mean, just separate from,
I agree.
Yeah.
And I also want to bring in, so we all know AIA. So AIA publishes and updates something that they call Code of Ethics. I will pull it up on the screen in a minute, but so in it, so in other words, they're asking all architects who are in this profession to abide by these guidelines. And one of them is actually titled Intern and Professional Development, right? And so beyond, so this is what, this is an effort, a group effort, a collective effort that is meant to, lift the whole profession. So in other words, established architects are going to go the extra mile and offer the extra help and support to help train, newer and younger, architects in training to be fully in the profession. So it's also something that you don't have to feel sheepish about asking. That you can at least check in and count on the fact that they understand it as a responsibility, a higher goal that benefits the profession.
And I think you can also, I know you're going to talk about interviews in a little bit, but I think it's also a really important question to ask any prospective employer. Do they, on top of salary, do they have any kind of stipend for professional development? Do they have any sort of support for you to go to seminars, to take an AIA class on the ARE, to apply towards your exam costs for that matter? A lot of firms do that, and I think it's incredibly important that, and if they do that, they're already telling you that they're supportive of that professional
They're
development.
putting their money
That's right.
where they're
That's right.
Yeah.
And so those kinds of things are really important, but take advantage of that, right? So I have two people again in my firm, junior, who have been, well, let's see, one's been with me for 3 years. She's just starting to study for the ARE. She's going to take her first one hopefully in another month. And then another person who's been with us for about 9 months, and she's studying to be a lead associate, right? We didn't propose that. We didn't, we said, she came and said, this is what I want to do. We said, great. All right, here's your stipend. You can do what you want with it. So again, that proactive nature I talked about at the beginning is really important. It will get your employer's attention. They will notice that you're taking initiative and saying, I'm going to make myself, I'm going to keep educating myself and making myself a better professional. So really important.
Yeah, I think it does come across as commitment. Right? So not somebody who would leave the profession or not there on a whim, but somebody who's thinking long term, right? And all of those qualities speak very well of you, right?
Yeah. So
should we touch on some interview do's
yeah,
and don'ts?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So actually, I'm going to just very quickly introduce. So hopefully most of you guys know this already. So Samina Sitapkan is, she's BArch faculty, but one of her roles, she's a liaison, the faculty liaison and advisor to anything that has to do with licensure. So if you have, so please do your own research, but if you have any questions, she's your go-to. So she will organize things like this. So these were events where speakers who are in charge of the licensing requirements external to the academy or university are invited to come and speak to the students. So she's our representative representing this department to all of those external organizations. So she's your go-to. And she just recently, so this was her presentation just this spring. This was an event last year. So this was also recorded and taped. There's a lot of really valuable information because it had been in flux. It's stable now, but the requirements were changing. So you can look that up on the Academy website. I think with that, we've also asked Mimi to speak to the interview process from the employer's perspective, like from the person on the other side of the table.
I just did this a week ago. And I have another interview in our office coming up next week, so it's probably very prominent in my mind. For us, we're a small firm. We're a 10-person firm, so we have there's very key things that we're looking for in people that we bring on. And we also want to know that person, first and foremost, is really going to be a team player, that they're going to be able to kind of plug into work with any one of us, right? At whatever skill level. So we don't actually spend a lot of time, I'll be honest, talking about software skills necessarily. If we see it on your resume, we trust that you are putting that on faithfully and that you can jump in at whatever level you're at, because we also know that we are going to teach you a lot, right? That's our expectation. And so we just had an interviewee who had a master's of MArch, from a few years ago, got out into the field when there was absolutely no work, completely the worst time ever. It was a complete downturn. His background was in graphic design, so he went back into graphic design, so still stayed obviously in a design field for a while, and is just coming back to architecture now at a later age and his first job, so no architecture experience, right? So he was really nervous about the fact that, yes, I kind of know Revit, but not really, and yes, I know some AutoCAD, but I'm not that great, blah, blah, blah. He won us over in an instant because his passion was so real. His desire to come back and really do what he always wanted to do, he was great. He just said, I'm going to do this. And we said, fine, we'll teach you Revit. You'll just learn right alongside other people, what our standards are. And that was really interesting because I think he was really nervous about the fact he wasn't coming with a whole lot of credentials as an older person, right? But it didn't matter to us because the passion was there, the interest was there, the determination was there. I just sat with him the other day, and he's going to sign up for AXP. I mean, he's all over this. He is so ready, right? And it's really inspiring. And you think, great, we're really happy to have someone like that who really just wants to keep learning and jump right in. So that's a big deal, that you can express that in an interview to someone. Sometimes our interviews are 30 minutes long if we just can tell it's not a good fit, and sometimes this one was over 2 hours. I mean, we just started having a great conversation, right? And I think that's one of the things you want to think about too. How do I engage this particular employer in a conversation? And they may not have 2 hours to spend. We didn't really either, but it was fun. They may have an hour. That's fine. But it's really a conversation. It shouldn't be them just asking you a bunch of stuff. You should obviously really need to come in knowing them as best you can through their website, through LinkedIn, through whatever means, or if it's referral from someone, a faculty member here, what is it about this firm? You need to be really clear about why you want to work for them. It's not just a job, but what is it that they're doing in particular that resonates with what your goals are. If you are just see yourself in healthcare, then that's great. Then those are the firms that you're going to look to. See who's doing interesting things, new things in healthcare environments, that kind of thing, right? So you want to be really clear that you know these people as best you can before you actually get to talk to them. And then, great, what an opportunity. Now I can actually talk to you. These are the things that I found on your website, or these are the things that I've learned about you. Can you tell me more? Is this, am I getting this right? I think it's really important for you to also ask them specifically, if I'm hired, what will I be working on, right? It's really good to know what is it that they have lined up, why are they interviewing, right? What are they hiring for? So then you can, again, think, this is a dialogue, does that sound interesting to me? Is that something I want to do, right? Just because you're getting the interview, you may walk out of there thinking that wasn't the right match either, and that's fine, right? It's really got to be a conversation, okay? The other thing I want to say is about your portfolio. Everybody wants to show their work, and all employers obviously want to see your portfolio. They won't have time to see every single project you've ever done, and they won't have time to hear every thought you ever had about that project, okay? So there's a really important editing process on your part around the projects you want to show. I usually ask candidates, just show me 3 projects. I don't need to see everything. I can actually see a lot without, I can read, I can see drawings, I can see what you've done.
I think that's such an important point that I think students often forget. It's like, I think in a way, I like to think of the kinds of drawings and diagrams we create as like our own secret language in our profession.
Right.
And we've spent a lot of years like deciphering and creating them. And so oftentimes a really clear set of plans and sections and diagrams, like in a minute, will scan what the intent was. And so you don't have to laboriously try to walk us through every decision. Yeah. And I think that's something that you can count on, knowing who the audience is, like knowing that if your drawings are good, they're going to save you a lot of time so that you can talk more about, so that you can convey a sense of who you are and how you work, not so much about that particular drawing or diagram.
I think when I say like pick your top 3, then what's interesting to me is why did you pick that project? Why did it resonate with you? What was it about the program or the site or anything that you were like, I love this project? Why did you love that project? Because I got to learn about this. Or, you know, also hearing struggles is really, it's not, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
You can say, I struggled with this project. I couldn't figure out the structure, or I had the worst time trying to, you know, get the site orientation right with this program to match, blah, 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 whatever that issue was. But I finally found a way to do it. Here's how, right? It's showing your problem solving. It's showing that you cared to work through and find the best solution you could. Those are really key things that people want to hear, because that's what we're going to have you do. If I hire you, that's exactly what you're going to do. You're going to run into problems. You're going to run into struggles. We do it every day. And I want to know that you have the means to look at things upside down, backwards, sideways, and find a different way
and ask for help.
And
ask for help. Know when to ask for help. Ask early enough, right, so people can respond.
Right.
And I think that it's tricky because, you know, of course, you know, we want you to be confident. You know, have confidence in your passion, the skills you've acquired. But at the same time, you have to show humbleness. I mean, let's be realistic, right? For many of you, this is your first job out of the school, and so it's a given that you're going to do a lot of learning once you start working. So while you have confidence and know what your skills are, know the value that you bring, be open-minded and humble enough to talk about these struggles, because you're not going to. It's a false illusion that you know if I ask for help, that means I'm showing a weakness in me, or that I'll never have to ask for help because I'll figure it out on my own. That's not why you're being hired for that position.
Yeah. I think the counterpoint is that it's actually about the inquisitiveness of you yourself as an individual. Yeah. And I also, I've heard that it's also good if you can say to your supervisor, are there examples in the office that I can also look at? Because that's a way for you to then analyze or have that opportunity to dissect the process that's in the office. So it's both understanding what is coming in the office as a culture in the way that thinking is done as part of the workflow, and you're initiating, I want to learn about this process. So I think even asking about examples is another way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, again, going back and saying to yourself, do I know what the goal of this is? They've asked me to participate in this particular project or this task or whatever. Am I really clear about what the goal is? Because if I'm not, how do I get there? Right? So knowing what that goal is, or having your supervisor really spell it out. They don't have time to tell you how to get to the goal. That's okay. We're going to get to it in different ways, right? But they're going to say, this is what I need at the end of the day, or this is what we need to have figured out by the end of the day. And they may even say, I want you to go look at the code first, or I want you to do this first and that first. They're not going to necessarily tell you where, but they're saying, here's a thought process you might take on, right? That's really key, because again, if I have to sit and explain every single step, I'm just going to do it. Right. I'm not going to give it to you. So, again, there's a balance between, okay, I get the goal, here's what we need to figure out, here are the questions that need to get answered. Who do I have access to? Well, you've got consultants, you've got me, you've got, whoever. And then you kind of figure out what that path looks like. And that's what we want you to do, because if you can do that, we can give you the next echelon, right? We can move you up. You can go to now a job captain. After a few years, you can be the project manager. We need to see that ability to organize and navigate.
And I think, with this, I think expressing the desire, so even if you don't know the first thing about how to go from, getting the project to getting it built, expressing the desire is that you are really hungry to know how it happens. So all of the training, the intern hours, the actual, day-to-day experience, Mimi mentioned the open communication in a open environment, open office environment. So all of this kind of ambient conversations that you hear, they all add up towards this kind of a knowledge about, this is the process, this is what it takes, these are all the people that we need to involve. But developing that, expressing your desire to develop that overall view, right, to your supervisor, to your boss, is going to really speak well of you, and it'll help you better understand your role, because you have a really important piece, a job within that larger goal. So to understand what is the overall outcome that the firm or the client, the city wants to accomplish, and what's my role in it, is really helpful. I think it's, on the one hand, your boss will look at you with an eye to, if she's asking these kinds of questions, in the next promotion cycle, I'm going to consider that into fact and give her more responsibilities. And also, I think it brings value, and you feel more rewarded in what you're doing, right? So let's say that you find this particular task very mundane and boring and repetitive. But I think if you understand the larger picture of why that has to be done and why it's a critical piece that needs to be done, then I think it helps, right, to understand.
Yeah. And there are some mundane parts of it.
They are a lot,
Really?
yeah.
So,
any don't do this, like do nots
in an interview?
During an interview process?
I think the thing I would not do is, well, one, not talk too much. Just don't go on and on and on. Again, know when to stop, know when to pause to offer an opportunity for questions and more dialogue. But you talked about being humble, confident and humble. There's a fine line, right? We want to know that you're confident. We want to know that you're excited. We want to know that you're, engaged in the kind of work that we do. But yeah, we don't want to think, oh, there's no way we could give that person something mundane to do. They're going to be annoyed or something, right? So there's again this kind of like being just receptive, right, to any of the kinds of tasks. So the don'ts are, don't talk too much, give and take. And then I think if you're limiting what you're talking about in the portfolio, that's the other thing. Don't try to go through your whole portfolio, because there just won't be time.
Right. And were there any examples of questions that you were asked at the end of the interview where you felt like, oh wow, that's a really good question? Or any questions that like, no, that's an inappropriate question?
No, people have not asked inappropriate questions. The ones that are curious, again, kind of come back to, if I'm hired, they're not assuming there will be. If I'm hired, what would I work on? I'm excited to know what would that be. So that gives us an opportunity to pull up sort of new projects on the screen and say, here's one that's up in Santa Rosa. It's coming. That's going to be in schematic design. The likelihood you'd be on that one, right? Or maybe in the short term, we're trying to finish up this affordable housing community center, and we need your help first on that, and then over here. So that really gives them a kind of vision for probably the next 6 months to a year. And I think that's really valuable, because if you as the candidate go, that doesn't really excite me too much, then that's fine. That's fair. Don't take the job knowing you're going to be on a project, likely going to be on a project that really doesn't interest you, because that's not a good match. Right? So, and
I think the fit is also an important idea. So again, in the beginning, early years, it's hard to be choosy, but that's what the interview process is really about, so they're trying to get to know you as a whole person to see if the fit is right. So there's a culture, so beyond the kinds of projects that the firm does, there's a culture that's within, so we call it in this school studio culture. So each firm has a studio culture, slightly different than the other. And a big part of the interview process is kind of trying to envision, you being part of that culture. How is this going to work with the kinds of personalities, that's already in the office. That's one.
The point about maybe not having the perfect job in the beginning, we did have a graduate that saw it as an opportunity. She was disappointed she wasn't hired by the firm she really wanted, but what she realized is the firm that did hire her became a stepping stone to this other office. And she hung on to her initial job for a while until she realized that she needed to grow, and then learn through the experience of this smaller practice that then just mushroomed and gave her then the platform to apply to this next other tier of organization, much larger and much more global. So sometimes you may not see that little special thing that happens that's right in front of you, but when it becomes a stepping stone, as in all of our careers, you have to start from somewhere. So I always feel that there's always some opportunity in what's presented to you, no matter what. So you try to find, if it's not your first choice, there's always something to gain out of that experience.
Absolutely. We have about 10 more minutes of Mimi's time, and I thought, could you reflect on, so I think one of the toughest things maybe for people going after their first job is the salary negotiation. So we'll cover kind of the numbers and all that details later, but just from an employer's perspective, what are some kind of overview and what are some do's and don'ts, and what does the process look like? How do you expect them to, the questions asked, or do you expect them to answer on the spot? Yes, I'm going to take this job on the spot, or is it okay for them to say, I'll get back to you tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a give and take.
Yeah.
So we usually ask people what they're looking for because we don't know. They could. And then we have to sort of evaluate that based on, what we've seen them present, the hour we've had with them. Sometimes it's hard. But before we ask them that, we go through and say, this is what our firm provides. Okay, obviously there's salary, and then there's so many paid vacation days, and there's so many paid holidays, and there's health care at this rate, and there's dental. We go through all the benefits, and there's the stipend for professional development, and there's participation in a 401k, and we go through everything, all the things that we offer. So they have a big picture of not just a number, but everything that's in that. And then we say, because the salary is negotiable. It has to be. It has to be kind of, what are you bringing to the table? What do I think I need from that person? Again, projecting what project I'm going to put them on. And then we usually just say, what is it? What's the range that you're looking for? Is it a hard number? Is it a, between this and that? And they'll tell us. And if it really is like a number that's easy, if it's a number that's easy, then usually we can answer on the spot saying that will work. If it's a number that's a little bit higher than we expected, then we may have to say we need to look at that a little bit.
And we'll go through later about what those numbers are, so you'll have the ranges.
But it's not a deal killer either.
Right.
Because if they come back with a number that we think is perhaps too high, we can always come back and say, are you willing to bring that down a little bit and then let us revisit it with you in 3 months. So we have a sort of trial period. So we can say, let's see if this is a good fit. You're asking for this much. We don't know that we can, agree to that right now. We need to see you perform X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
I don't really say it that way, but it's kind of like, well, let's have that 3 month to see if we're a good fit or not.
Right.
And we've done that before. Where someone has said, okay, I'll meet you halfway, and then can we talk about it again in 3 months? And
open the discussion. Yeah. And then the other thing is, so I think she already alluded to this, but asking for time to think about it does not indicate, doesn't mean that you're not interested in the position. It's a perfectly, so let's say, you're so lucky, so you're offered the job on the spot and they throw out a number, or even afterwards. So after you go home, they vetted all the other candidates, you're given a number. You don't have to, it's perfectly fine to ask for time. Don't ask for a week, but ask for time so that if you're receiving offers from other firms, or if you need to talk to your family, if you have dependents, if you need to revisit your budget to see what's actually feasible. So it's not a decision that nobody's looking for you to make the decision on the spot. Because it's a big deal. It's a big decision, right? Yeah. And with what you agree to, it has to be workable for you, right? And so it doesn't indicate the fact, it doesn't speak to your level of interest, the amount of time that you ask for. So I think a day or two, right, is perfectly within acceptable, normal ranges.
And you can always say, I am interested.
Yes.
And, but I do need time to look at that relative to family, whatever it is. Whatever it is. That's perfectly reasonable. I don't think we ever come to a hard and fast conclusion right at the end of the interview. I don't think that's ever happened.
Right. And then would you say in your case, is it usually emailed back and forth, or do you prefer phone calls back and forth?
Because I'm so hard to get a hold of. It's usually my fault because I'm in the field a lot.
But a lot of people would hear you say that.
So I say, you can call me. I may not get back to you right away, but email is perfectly fine. Okay. So what we do is we talk about a lot of things. If we're sincerely interested in that person, I do follow up that day or by the next morning with an offer letter. So they have something in writing. It's not what they've just heard us and I'd say I'm going to put all of this in an offer letter to you, and then you can think about it.
Consider it, yeah.
And we will then, if they've told us what they're asking for, we will tell them what we can offer and see if, again, then they've got everything in front of them. It's, not like, hey, didn't you say I was also going to get X? And
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
I think you mentioned, so the offer letter is important, and I found that some students hesitate to ask for an offer letter, which in the industry is actually pretty standard and normal, because you want to make sure you are getting what was discussed and what's been sent to you is exactly what you also heard.
Right.
So I sense, though, like even in our audience right here, that there's been some hesitancy about how to even bring that up, and I've actually suggested to just be
very upfront. I
direct
mean, it's a contractual relationship that you're about to enter into.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's two ways to do that. You can ask for an offer letter if they just are like, I'm crazy busy, I can't get that to you. You can also offer to say, I'm going to email what I heard, right? And at least there's some form of written,
Sure.
If that's how you get to it, I don't see there's anything wrong with that, but at least there's some understanding. You say, because again, when you're done with the interview, you want to go back and thank them anyway, right? I mean, via email or something. So it can be part of your thank you. You can say, thank you so much for your time today. Just to recap, here's what I heard. Please correct if I misheard something or misunderstood. So you're getting agreement. Somehow that's all you're trying to do with an offer letter or that kind of email is just, is this what we agreed to? This is what I think we agreed to, but
it's a good way to put it in writing if the other person is evading it or too busy to do it.
Right.
In the last couple of minutes, so I'm just noticing that at least our on-site attendees are all women, and there is such a thing as gender gap in pay, even in our profession, unfortunately. And I think especially for young women entering the profession, so the profession at large wants to even it out, right? They want more women in the profession. But I think I feel particularly protective of young women entering the profession so that how to confidently and appropriately make sure that you're not given a lower rate or number or any kind of discrepancy because of your gender. And so if you could now switch your hat and become now the director of the school, is there advice that you would give them in how they the negotiating process or even during the interview, how they carry themselves to kind of avoid as much as possible the gender gap in pay?
Well, I mean, you're conducting yourself as professionally and as business-like as you can is certainly the first step. To not be, being relaxed and being casual are kind of two different things, right? Being relaxed in how you present yourself, but still in a very professional and business-like manner is really important, and not being so casual and kind of joking around and stuff. That's probably less, less impressive to the employer. So I don't think anybody would really do that, but just maybe it doesn't beg saying. As far as the salary and negotiation, you have to do your homework. You have to be equipped with having done your research into surveys, into all the different venues that are out either online or the AIA compensation survey. All of that, you have to be armed with that. And you have to say, this is the job. And let me back up for a second. The other part of that offer letter should include what your job description is, not just the terms and benefits, right? And I'm sorry, I failed to mention that because that's really important, because what is it you're doing? What is the title they're giving you? If they're saying you're a designer and these are the things that we're having you do, that's much easier than to look up in a compensation survey or other online platform that does those kinds of comparisons and say, oh, I should be right here. They're calling it a designer. That looks like what I'm being told I'm going to be. So I'm in that range. And so before you ever get there, I should be in the $50,000 to $60,000 range. I'm just making that up.
We're going to go over all that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And then they come back and they go, well, we're going to, we start everyone at 35. And you go, I don't think so. So, but that, right? It's not like you have the confidence to say, and again, I know it can be uncomfortable, but I think it's fair to say, that's interesting. My research, here's my research, and politely, my research shows that the job description we're talking about falls in here. Am I, did I misunderstand the job description, or blah blah blah, whatever. There's ways to talk about that, and they may go, oh shoot, we haven't looked at that information for 7 years. We thought everybody was starting. You never know.
Right. Yeah.
You never know.
Yeah.
So do your homework. Come in knowing I don't know if the surveys that you're showing are split, or have gender.
It doesn't.
I didn't think so.
It doesn't actually. That's an interesting point.
I think that's actually good, though, in some ways. Make it blind, because the
Yeah.
number is a number, no matter who's.
But
applying for it. It's a level.
there are surveys where it's volunteer anonymous.
Yeah.
There are surveys where you can see the gender.
I think that.
I see it. I see the gap.
I know.
Yeah.
It's good information. It's good information.
But so we'll
if
go
you
through
have,
all this
I think the AIA's
yeah.
compensation survey is probably one of the more reliable within the industry because people respect the AIA.
Yes.
They may say, "Oh, that's some fly-by-night, website you're looking at, and how do I know that applies here?"
Like for example,
it's regional.
This is a poll, but this is an individual volunteering the information.
Yeah.
Whereas the AIA survey, it goes to the firms.
Yeah, I just finished one of those the other day.
Right.
Or maybe it's been a month now. Time flies. But we get one every year that says
the new one's out. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you pay for this level, this level, this level, this level? We're a small firm, so probably and then I don't know, big firms.
Yeah, different rate. Yeah.
So you can, and we usually buy that every year. We usually buy it for whatever it is.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, often because we want to just. Well, it's okay. It's a business expense, but you can look back on it and say. Oh shoot, we were not really very good. We need to catch up with that person. We've done that before. We're like, ooh, we were not paying them very well. We're going to bonus at the end of the year. Seriously.
And I think this actually brings up in just the last few seconds before Mimi leaves is, so let's say you started at the entry level salary, and let's say years pass, and typically you'll be asked to do something called a performance review, where you self-reflect on how you've done, and you'll hear feedback about your supervisors. So it's a really good time to because I think sometimes people comprehensively review all the salary levels and norm. Sometimes they don't. So you can self-advocate for yourself, right? And ask for it to be reviewed. Your salary.
You can wait a year, but I would advocate people say, can we have just a casual conversation in 3 months? It may not be salary based unless you talked about that from the start, but it could be performance based. So at least you don't get blindsided if they don't think you're doing well and they're not really telling you, right?
Right.
So 3 months is a pretty good indicator of we see you meeting deadlines, we see you doing, we would like you to work on this, we'd like you to work on that. It's, that we do that with all new employees. There's always a 3-month review. It's not necessarily
not formal, but
monetarily based. It's more performance, like here's what we see you doing, can you, but we need you to improve on this, that, and the other thing.
So that's your report card in the office.
And the other thing we do, and we tell people this, because we're a small firm, we don't always know if we're going to have a boom year or not a boom year, right? It depends. It's cyclical too. We do give bonuses at the end of the year. If we're in that position, and we have been in the last few years, we do give bonuses because we want to reward people for, getting us to that place.
Right.
We can't necessarily sustain that by.
Right. So it's different year to year based on how the firm does. Yeah.
But we're pretty transparent about that. We say, hey guys, we had a really good year. Here you go. You all contributed.
Cool.
So that's a nice piece of information to know about a certain practice. But the stepping stone of the performance review actually can contribute to, the bonus.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it's a criteria in that.
Right.
So in a way, being proactive again ahead of time about the smaller periods of performance reviews actually builds your own professional development to be much more valuable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mimi,
for
joining us.
Yeah.
It's
Get out there and interview.
Yeah, really valuable. Thank you.
Fun. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thanks. My pleasure. I'm off to.
So I think since we just finished talking about salary, we just keep going on salary.
Yeah, we should. Good topic.
So actually, I guess I should navigate it here. So this is the compensation report that Mimi was talking about. Sorry. So it's, I don't know, I mean, it's great, Mimi as an employer, it's great that she buys it, but it is $375. But you can also go to this website.
Yes.
So if you go in, you'll get something like this. where you'll see the definitions. I'm sorry, I can't see that far. Position description. So this is what Mimi was speaking to. So you want, of course, entry-level positions will have, lower amount of, salary. So you want to make sure that that's correct. So entry-level emerging professional is what we want. And then it's sorted by region. So for us in California, it's the Pacific. But obviously other states fall under other categories. And then the bottom, so this you may or may not have this information where it says revenue. So that speaks to the size of the firm. So a large multinational global corporate firm will be at the bottom end of the range. A smaller firm will be at the higher, towards the top of the list. But so if you plug in these criteria, what pops out is this number. Right. So what this tells us is in California, for an entry-level intern, your median, what you can expect to ask for and be offered, is close to $50,000. Right, that's what, and you can click through the other, so to see the range between small and large firms, you can click through these to compare the numbers to see the range. So this is the kind of research that Mimi is requesting that you do. So if you have this information and it's and the AIA is particularly well respected and reputable, then you have really good grounds to counteroffer. Like if the offer is if you offer something lower than this number, ask them why, and let them know that you've done the research and that you felt that there was a discrepancy, and ask them the reason why, right? Other research. So I did want to. So I think I took it for granted, but I did come across a young student recently who, because I think you guys are the degree first, and then the first internship or first job, and so she kind of forgot that, of course, if you're in the profession for 5 years or 10 years, your salary goes up. Yeah. And so I just pulled one. So Architect 1 is so at a 5 or more experience, the same criteria, Pacific California. So about $20,000 more, $70,000. So you can go all the way up to the positions. It goes all the way up to a managing principal. So you can see the ranges.
But the good thing about you showing that is you actually can see the stepping stone to the next position.
Yes.
What is that criteria in performance that you're grooming your experience to? So in that way, it's also good to look ahead. Yeah. Because you would say, I'm going to go from internship to job architect, right. A project, Right, so this is, I had to cross out the interns because the AIA recently, the word intern has been controversial because it also implied unpaid interns, which is unethical and in most cases illegal. Right. So the AIA, in order to avoid the confusion, so intern now only applies to students. So not free, paid, but students who are working summer jobs or working part-time. So for the salary compensation, they've replaced intern with architectural associate or design professional. So that's what you're going to find. Actually, in the pull-down menu, you'll see emerging professional, and then because this change just happened, so they're putting in bracket, formally intern. But this is the job description. So the level 1 is entry level, fewer than 2 years of experience. So these correspond to the salary survey brackets, to 3 years of experience, to 3 to 6 years of experience, 5 or more, 8 or more, 10 or more, right? And in the salary, so these are the definitions that the AIA has crafted, and it applies to most of firms. And oftentimes you'll see in the job descriptions that they actually reference, not always, but oftentimes they reference these titles, so that you can, so then your research is more accurate, salary research. Actually, where were we? Oh, so one thing I did want to point out, so the difference between these two, so this is, so when, so in our profession, when somebody calls him or herself an architect, that means that you are credentialed. That means you have your licensure. If you don't have, so this Architect 1 already means that that person is licensed. If you don't have a license, but you have a similar number of years experience, they separate it by saying same definition Architect 1 except unlicensed. So it's called unlicensed architecture/design staff 1. So same 5 years, but no license. So the salary drops a little bit, 63,000 versus 70,000. That's correct. So I'll repeat the question. So the question was that oftentimes we come across, maybe even resumes by portfolios, especially where a student, after his or her name, puts the label architect. That's illegal.
actually.
Yeah.
You can't do
is.
that.
Yeah.
And so when you
Yeah.
come across things like that, that they haven't done the research.
Yeah.
Yeah. So even, so let's say fast forward 2 years, now you're working in an office, you still can't call yourself an architect unless you have the credential.
Yeah, it's part of it is also the misrepresentation in the profession. A lot of other folks would like to be licensed, but they put the word architect or even architecture, like what you're implying. In the Better Business Bureau of California, just as Karen said, it is illegal. It's actually you actually can be sued for that.
Yeah,
So,
or the AIA will, if they find you, they'll come and reprimand you.
That's
You'll
right.
be publicly shamed.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, you had a question?
Question for the previous one. So what's the proper title?
What title?
Yeah, to put on.
Yeah. So the question is, so if we can't say, name, comma, architect, what's legal? So oftentimes we'll see architectural designer, and now because we don't have to use the word intern,
Yep.
I'm sorry, we can borrow AIAs, right? Architectural associate or design professional.
Right.
But I think architectural designer is a kind of a catch-all, so it doesn't necessarily imply somebody who's at that intern 1 salary bracket, but somebody in general who's in the profession, young professional who isn't quite licensed yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so we covered that. So these are the definitions. So this is a survey from the last. So the survey, by the way, is done every 2 years. Oh, so I guess it was 2017. So this is from the last cycle in 2015.
Right.
The 2017 one, I think it was just published. So I couldn't find without paying the $375.
Yeah.
I couldn't find the equivalent information. But these are, so it's a big book. So they in addition to salary, they ask all kinds of questions. Different ways to filter. So just 2 examples where most firms typically give, offer higher salaries for somebody with a licensure license. And BIM is Revit is becoming more and more prevalent. So it used to be a more rare skill a few years ago, but there was a financial incentive. So they did hire or they did offer more money if you had Revit skills. I don't know if that's still true. This is an interesting graph because all of this over time. So one of the things, Mimi mentioned about the cyclical nature of the economy, and architecture is the canary in the coal mine. Do you guys know what that expression means? So in the coal mine where people go underground and dig for coal, the oxygen is really thin, so it's really rare. So canary is a type of bird who is very susceptible. So if the canary is starting to feel sick, that means that the miners had to leave the coal mine. It's dangerous for them. So it's the first indicator before it becomes visible. So our profession, unfortunately, is very susceptible to the ups and downs of the economy. Because when we get into a recession, the first things that people cancel are what we call capital improvement projects. If I own a house and I wanted to do a renovation, but the economy went down, that's the easy thing for me to cancel, and that applies to large firms also, right? So, so this is why it's especially important to take heed Mimi's advice about how to keep your job, because it's not. So these cycles, like between the 2 of us, we've seen like more than one now, many cycles. So it's just the nature of things. Economy goes up, and then Mimi is able to offer bonuses. People are hiring. It's easier to get jobs, but it's going to crash. And then people are laid off. So it's hard to get jobs, and then people are also laid off. And so in most cases. So for those of you who are fortunate, you can, if you perform well, you can hold on to your position in a higher likelihood than others who haven't been doing as good a job. But sometimes it's when it gets really bad, you will get laid off even if you have been doing well, right? But all of the proactiveness, the inquisitiveness, those are all really great habits just to have in general anyway for your own professional development. But it also safeguards you to some extent about when the economy goes down and now firms need to lay people off, right? So something good to keep in mind. So here are some other. So Glassdoor and ArchiNect are other sources, places for research, salary research. They're not as reputable and vetted as the AI compensation. So the numbers there, you'll see numbers that vary a lot, or the information isn't. So what's great about the AIA is it's standardized. So you're comparing apples to apples. Whereas these more kind of crowdsourced sources of information, it can really vary. So what you're looking, so you want to remove all of the outliers and kind of look for a pattern or trend. But it's a good source nonetheless. And so in this one, we are showing this as an example because it does list a lot of the, it's really good research for you to do if you're applying for this and prepping for interviews, for the interview questions, because, so I pulled up, so these are the criteria that they're looking for, right? Number of experience, credentials that they're looking for, software skills, ability to communicate, and such. And then these are the, in the bottom paragraph, this is what, this is the firm saying, in return, we're going to offer you this package, right? So it includes not just the salary, but, other benefits, right? So your research, when you are getting ready for the negotiation, so the top list and the bottom list and the number and do they offer, what kinds of medical insurance do they offer, what are the benefits? Those are all proportional, right? So if you get an offer from another firm, but their package is different, then you have to account for that in the salary number as well. So here's another one. So here we have 62 for San Francisco and 52 for national, but I'm not sure. I think that's at a higher end. So here's the Architect salary poll. So I found this interesting because it collects whether they're male or female, as well as whether they're grads or undergrads, and where their degree was obtained, and whether they work at corporate firm. It'll say boutique firm, and so you can kind of see not only the size of the firms, but also, I think unfortunately it's very common to find that interns or entry-level people who work in architect offices, they get very low money. And you can see some examples of this. So they'll say architect, and then you see the number, and you're like, oh my God, how do you live on that? But this is a really good, and so this also gives you can also filter by location, age, gender, job title. So it's a really good backup research for your salary. So I pulled up San Francisco. So this is kind of for less than 1 year. So this is the range. I think under 20, I think this is okay if you're still a student. But if you're graduating and if it's unless there's some other circumstance that, it could be that your benefit package or your stipend is really robust. And so the base salary is low, or there may be other conditions. But in general, I think something in this range, like 22, 24, something like that, is a healthy number.
And a good thing to know, because it's actually come up before as an intern, the minimum hourly rate in San Francisco is $15. Right. So you should not be working for less than that.
You can go to a McDonald's and get $15.
You might as well, right? Yeah.
Yes, it's also good research. And so these are broken down by hourly per hour, and so that number, if you multiply it by the total number of hours in a year, they come to what I think Mimi referenced, $50,000 to $60,000. That's the window that we're looking for. And just a quick, I don't know, this is something I think we all kind of learn to do because so the number that you multiply the hourly rate to get to the annual is 2,080. So that's if you work 40 hours each week. For the number of weeks that firms typically ask you to work, the total number is 2,080 hours. So if you see a salary number like this, you divide it by 2080, and you get the hourly, and vice versa. Okay, so I think I'm going to actually jump to advice from our alumni. Yeah. And so I think I'm going to actually do this to get there faster. So we've solicited some quotes from our alumni. And one of the things that I thought was really helpful was, so one of the takeaways was that alumni advice, it's a life it's a life-changing decision, right? So we already spoke about how there's no expectation that you have to respond on the spot or within the hour, but make a really informed decision, right? So think about who are the people that you need to solicit advice from, what's the budget calculation that you need to do, right? So weigh all of those factors, before going back to the negotiating table. But anyway, so this is some of the, so in terms of the interview process, so Mimi already mentioned that you're not going to have the luxury to go through, because all of you, the projects that you put in there, you probably have presented it at least 3 times, 2 times, right? Mid-review, final review. So you can't go into that automatic mode and just recite what you did. And so it really has to do with how you synthesize. So meaning having done all of that, so the projects in the portfolio for most of you will have been a year, maybe even 2 years ago. So now that you're reflecting 2 years back afterwards, what other larger learning lessons? How can you use the themes that you're going to talk about, the struggles and in the project that speaks to you as an employee, so that the person can envision you being the problem solver, being the proactive person, being inquisitive. Research, it's really, really important. You will feel more prepared, and that'll come across in your body language. You'll feel more confident. You'll have intelligent questions to ask. It really is a must. And so what that tells us is that it's a lot of time commitment. Looking for a job is a full-time job. So this student, she practiced. So I think this is really important. I think most of you have experienced that for your, say, studio projects, if you rehearse your verbal presentation, you do so much better during the actual review. It couldn't be truer for interview process, because I think it's normal for everybody to be a little bit nervous, right? But you want to be not so nervous that you get flustered and you come away from the interview thinking, oh, I didn't do as best as I could have, right? And so there's nothing that is going to help you more than rehearsing. You can do it with friends, with partners, with your mentors, with your faculty, with yourself, in the mirror. You could record. So the more practice, the more times you spend talking about it, the more condensed it's going to become, and the more comfortable you'll feel. And I think especially because if a lot of you, if English is not your first language, it's really important to, because oftentimes you get flustered and you lose the vocabulary. It's the first thing that goes, right? You can't recall the words. And so the rehearsing, the practice is key. Okay. I thought this was interesting. So oftentimes, so I think nowadays we can't always assume the media in which that your portfolio will be in. Sometimes it's a hard bound book. Sometimes it's a screen, right? It's a multiple. So you want to, I think, kind of pull yourself out of the situation and look at have empathy. Be the person on the other side of the table, and think about their experience of what you're asking them to do in 30 minutes, right? And so oftentimes it's good to consolidate what you're going to show them as much as you can. Meaning, so don't do like first year of studio in a book form because you happen to have made a portfolio then, and then pull out your laptop and so consolidate as much as do one or the other. If you do a digital media, a device, don't ask for Wi-Fi code. Make sure the battery's charged, like basics, things like that. Don't embarrass yourself. Save the file locally and all that, and make sure that you practice looking at whether it's print or digital, because you're going to turn it so that it's right side up for them, and you're going to looking at it from upside down. So you have to practice presenting it upside down, right? And oftentimes, or sometimes, I think the exceptions to this rule, where you don't only have to have everything in one place, is especially I think it depends on what it is, but let's say you have an internship experience from a previous office, and you have a working set of drawings, right? That you have that you didn't want, because the portfolio is very edited, so you didn't want to like pull snippets of what you did, but you wanted to present the whole drawing set as that you worked on as a team member. So you might bring that, or Other, like if you have a particular, like, I don't know what else it could be.
I was thinking about the
Yeah.
portfolio book that
Yeah.
a lot of you've learned to make with Mary Scott.
The,
And I think the earlier point about highlighting the key 3 critical projects first, I've seen that some of you would just tab those projects because they may not be in the same order when you go to a second firm because you want to emphasize something else. So I think it's important in that way then to practice opening up that book, which sections you plan to show them, you know, that particular project. So something to also add, I know that a lot of you think or feel I have to show all my design work, and something that Karen and I have seen recently is that what comes up at interviews is they want you to be off and running. So maybe you're part of a construction design document team, and they just want to get a sense that you've actually done some wall sections or you've learned about just the process and the method. Or even Mimi mentioned about building code. You know, do you know how to do the code? You should be able to have some aspect in your portfolio. It doesn't mean that you show them, oh, I did these egress diagrams in Studio, you know, 450 or something. But you should be able to say, well, in this particular project, I did learn about the building codes. Oh, here's my wall section class. Like, be ready to tab that piece. And then also, if you don't happen to have it, you always can offer to augment that, right? Even after the interview.
Yeah.
So I want to say that sometimes the portfolio isn't the be-all, end-all.
yeah, if it's full of
during-
renderings, then you know you kind of get labeled as, oh, that's the rendering person.
Yeah.
And
right.
I don't know
Yeah.
if the person has had, you know, experience drawing wall sections or doing a more technical drawing. But I
Yeah.
think so in the grad program, the wall section, if you have, is it a required class?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
put that in. It's a really great
It's a
class.
great class.
It's
It
a
is.
really great class.
Yeah.
Put the model in, put the
Yes.
drawing in, like,
Right.
you know, it's a really great class. And to the extent that it's makes sense, the comprehensive design.
Yeah.
Because it shows it holistically.
Right.
And also the Revit skill is how to present your Revit skill in your portfolio.
All you have to do, so in the portfolio, if it comes up, if they want to know, all you have to do is, you know, okay, this project, like these set of drawings were done in Revit, right? Yeah. And so sometimes people, I don't know, I feel a little bit weary, but sometimes people will ask about the workflow just to see that, you know, you're not plagiarizing or whatever. And so they'll ask about the workflow, you know, so, you know, which tools did you use for which aspect of the project? You know, did you
Yeah.
start in Rhino and then come into Revit and then did you go to Illustrator and whatnot? But so you might feel the question like that. But typically, you know, back to Mimi's point, Mimi software, you know, you're getting these degrees, MRX, PRX. It's a big commitment, time, money, you know, effort. And so you don't want to be a software person. You know, you don't want to,
Yeah.
you don't need the degree to become a renderer or Revit person, right?
Right.
But it's a tool, it's a basic tool that you have to have in order to be productive in the office, but it shouldn't be your biggest selling point. Okay, so in terms of the salary negotiation, so she shared that she spoke with 3 people. One was her dad, one was somebody in the profession. So she shared different kinds of information for each one. One was a friend who's, you know, similar, similar years, like recent grad, but in a different profession. So she really did her homework, right? She reached out to everybody in her network to get feedback, right? So that she's making a good decision. Ask for, so in her, so I think again going back to the gender, the gap and the pay in terms of based on gender. Don't be afraid to ask for more, right? So she happened to interview with a corporate firm, right? So it wasn't a small firm. So they gave her a number, she did her research, and then she asked for something, she asked for 8.5 more, and they came back with a 5% increase, right? That's worth it, right?
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to ask. It doesn't hurt to ask. Okay, so if you get interviews, even if you are not particularly fond of the firm or you know you didn't like their website, whatever, still go on the interview for 2 reasons. One, if nothing else, if your first impression was correct, you get practice. 2, oftentimes companies, not all companies have the luxury of updating their websites. So sometimes it doesn't quite speak to how things really are in the office, and so being there in person, talking to the person is really the best way to get to know the firm. right? So that you don't miss out on an opportunity. It takes a lot of time. She's sharing that she didn't anticipate how much time it would take. So she did it over the summer, and she had made all these travel arrangements to go on trips and such, and she regretted it at the end because it made it very stressful. And also when the firms do call you back and say, oh, can you come in for an interview, she had to work around the dates that she was going to be out of town. So it was really awkward and inconvenient. Okay, so before the interview, research. The firm, obviously the firm website. If you know the name of the person who's going to interview you, go ahead and look them up on LinkedIn. It's okay if they can see that you've looked them up. I think it actually speaks well that you're doing your research in advance. Yeah. If you don't know the person at the firm, you can just scan. So usually in firms, they will list under what they call people or our team. And in most cases, they'll list the leadership, people who, one of them is going to be interviewing you and making the hiring decision. So you can look them up. And I think something like this is a good, so even though you have an immediate goal in mind, in the way that you kind of reflect and speak to the conversation that Mimi was speaking to, is reflect, spend some time with yourself and your mentors thinking about where do you want to be in 5 and 10 years. And how could you work backwards from those goals to ask for, to use as a criteria for the kinds of positions you're looking for the kinds of experiences that you're looking for. And, this goes back to the point that Yim is making about, if you don't end up with the firm that you were in love with, end up somewhere else. It isn't so much, so let's say 2 years later, 5 years later, it isn't so much the name of the firm, that you're going to then present to your next interview. It's what you make of the experience, right? So wherever you end up, whether it was your first choice or second choice or third choice, think about how to maximize your learning potential so that the experience that you take away with you is still really valuable at your next place. Yeah. Research. Interview questions. So the alumni who shared, I skipped over it, but so she said they do really ask, tell me about yourself. And I think it's such an open-ended question. So you have to have, so rehearse, right? So expect something like that, a question as open-ended as that to be asked, and just rehearse. It doesn't mean that you have to revisit, like your entire life. But always filter it through the lens of the profession. Why are you there? Why is this person talking to you, right? So pick out the experiences that are relevant to the major that you've chosen, right? And why you're picking this firm, right? So if you have, I think I often find it's helpful, like if you have, in your family or within your network as a, person growing up, if you had an architect, if it exposure to architecture through parents or relatives or something, I think that's relevant. Or, I know you switch majors, right? So you could talk about that. So that could be a starting point. Why did you switch? And right, so it's even an open-ended when it's open-ended like this, it's always about your relationship to the profession. Right.
Yeah, I think there was an aspect that I think Karen mentioned in a previous workshop, but also Mimi highlighted it in a slightly different way today, which is when you talk about yourself, that bit of the struggle, so it doesn't have to be, 10 minutes of just yourself about the struggle, but you gently weave in how you achieved success through working through a difficult moment, right? And I think that's a way to create that imprint in that employer. Because as Mimi was describing that, I was thinking, what will make you memorable during that interview? They see many, many candidates. And so you have to remember, how do I distinctly become that image that someone remembers, either about the way that I think about my work and how I overcome difficulties, which is a word that Karen's mentioned many, many times. And it doesn't mean it's a negative aspect. It just shows you have the ability to persevere and then be successful. So those are all good things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Don't list software as your strength.
Yeah.
Team player, excellent, right?
Right.
So you have experience working in a team, and you find things that are rewarding about it. And What some other? Let's collect some other strengths before we go to the weaknesses. Reliable. Okay. Great. Time management skills. Reliable, dependable. Also, any other? Energetic. Great. I have a lot of energy. I'm really enthusiastic, and that's a big value, a big plus. Okay. Any other? No. So weaknesses. So like this is my own personal strategy because nobody so you want to be honest and truthful, but you also don't want to focus on like air out all of your laundry. List all of your weaknesses. Oftentimes, my own personal strategy is I actually couple them, because on the flip side of your strength is something that isn't. So for me, in my case specifically, so as one of my strengths, I list that I'm very detail oriented. Like I notice things, I care about detail, I care about all of the little. So, but on the flip side, I also have to really remind myself to see the bigger picture. Right? So one or the other by themselves may be negative, like partial, but it does tell you that I have awareness of something that I tend to do and something that I have to make an effort to do. Right, so you couple it as a set of strengths and weaknesses.
That's a great way to answer that question.
Yeah, so like we could do something similar to like team player, right? So, I mean, it could be something like discussing, and maybe there was a point when we were doing a group project or in another context where it was hard, it was challenging, there was a stumbling block, roadblock. You could talk about how you overcame it and how you became a better team player, how it was a learning experience, right? Or like if it's dependable, I could imagine that sometimes you rush through something just to get it done, and does something else suffer? And is it an effort for you, right? So you could couch it in the same way, because I know myself to be a good time manager and dependable. I have to make an extra effort to make sure that the quality is being met or whatever, right? So I think that's a good strategy. So the salary comes, I think, probably in the beginning, entering any profession, like it becomes very abstract, and because everything else, all of these other things, there's no number, and so we tend to just compare the number to number, which is the salary. And this is where speaking to as many people as you can, including your family members, is really helpful. Because I think it's hard for entry-level people to quantify. So sometimes you'll see that the base salary is lower for a firm because the package is really robust. And for the company, it's not just this number; it's the total number, right? To them, it's quantifiable.
And that's a very fine point to really understand, because the mistakes have been made for that very reason, that there's the thinking that the salary, which is really a base salary, I just know that a graduate didn't find out that the base salary included what that firm was thinking of as the benefits as well. And so it's always good to slow down a bit and make sure that you understand exactly what the package is. It's very easily missed.
So I mean, as a baseline, most firms will offer some kind of so 401ks are retirement, right? So they'll offer something. One may be more generous than the other. Health benefits, most firms, they'll offer some medical and dental, right, as a baseline. And professional development, same. Like most firms, the very, very small firms may not be able to, especially if you're not full-time employee. But if you're a full-time employee at a kind of small to mid-sized firm and up, they'll have something. Either they'll reimburse you for something, or they'll let's say you want to attend a conference, or they'll pay for your exam fees. So those are kind of standard. Vacation and sick time, paid holidays. So nowadays people call it PTO, right? So it used to be separated, but it's all one bucket, meaning these are the number of days that you're excused, you have off from the office. So 20 days, I think is about.
It's averaging.
Like about 20 days, right? So however you divide it up. So the total number of days, so that's something that you can compare firm to firm. So we went through this. Okay, here's an interview. I think the best advice is the attention should be on the work, not on your makeup, not on your dress, not on your shoes, not on your hair. So, I mean, dress up. I think for the most part, our students do this pretty well because a lot of us are respectful of our guest critics at final reviews, and we come more put together, right? So something like that, maybe a little bit more. But sometimes I think students, as part of that, I think some of the younger, women students, they put on makeup that they don't typically do, and then it goes overboard, right? So don't do that, because then we're so distracted by your makeup, your heavy makeup, that So the focus is always on the work. Whether or not should I, for men but also for women, should we wear a suit? Should we wear heels? How formal should we be? Like, is it like going to a wedding or meeting some? Be overdressed. You can't ever go wrong by being overdressed. So if you're a guy, wear a suit. When in doubt, wear a tie. Or if you're, if it's like a really laid back small firm, bring the tie in your pocket, and then you can kind of like assess the vibe as you walk in, and ask to go to the bathroom, put the tie on if you feel like you need to, or take it off if you feel like it's ridiculous, right? But for women, just kind of again, elegant, neutral, understated. Don't wear 4-inch heels, right? Don't wear anything that's too revealing, right? Again, the focus is on the work, right? So no jeans, so nothing casual, no t-shirts. Even if the firm is, let's say there's some design build firms in the city, they have like, it's like the woodshop environment that they also have, design in. So even if those people wear jeans and work boots and t-shirts, you shouldn't wear the same thing, right? Once you get hired and start working there, then you can dress like them, right? So this is kind of what you want to keep in mind, right? So if you are being asked to go to a client meeting where it's a more formal, you're representing the company, what are you going to look like? Day of the interview, I think it's always helpful. So I know it's assumed that the material is already sent in. Your resume, your cover letter, your portfolio, maybe through multiple channels. Maybe you sent it to the online website portal, but also emailed it to multiple people.
Right.
Don't assume that they're going to have it on hand. Right, if they're organized, so hiring is a big endeavor. So the bigger firms with better resources have people working on it full time, so they have the time to be organized. Other firms don't, right? So don't assume that they're going to be on top of things and have. So bring your own. Bring copies of your resume. Bring portfolio. Bring everything that you've sent in. And this is kind of my personal. I really appreciate when somebody sits down and they, like, first thing that they do after they have their stuff is a notepad and a pen.
Right.
It just speaks volumes, I feel like, right? Even during the interview. Because a lot of information is exchanged, right? So you're telling them about yourself, but they're going to tell you about the firm and about the kinds of work that they do. And it's a lot to retain. And if you start taking notes, it'll actually help you to form questions at the end, right? You said this, tell me more about, that effort, that project. So obviously, nothing buzzing, right? And the Wi-Fi connection, yes, it's true. Everywhere you go now has Wi-Fi, but I think we still, you probably have experience that so many things can go wrong, right? And that's it eats into. So if you're given 1 hour, you can spend 20 minutes trying to connect. Never, it's a no-no. Never do that. Save it locally. Oh yeah, so don't have, iced coffee cups, keys, right? Put everything away so that you're, shaking hands. And also arrival time. So, of course, you don't want to be late, and so you can be overzealous and arrive too early. Hey, go to a coffee shop. Don't go too early to the office because, the person who's going to interview you is not, they're doing something else. They're in a meeting, they're doing something. So 15 minutes, I think it's good, before. So if the traffic was really light that day or whatever, you arrive early, go hang out somewhere else.
Yeah. I want to add one more thing about the handshake. You should practice the handshake.
Oh, yeah.
And I think the most impressionable thing is to be able to extend your hand out. That really just says so much about just your person being a professional, being respectful. But we really should go through a series of practicing your handshakes.
That's a great idea.
It
And also
can't
eye
be-
contact
Yes.
as you're doing that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
it speaks to, I mean, it's a little thing. You may feel, it may be awkward for you because you haven't done it or not
Yeah.
in the habit of, but just the simple thing about, extending and making eye contact just, comes across as more confident,
Yeah.
right? That you're ready to see yourself as a professional.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like sitting posture, don't get too comfortable, like lean forward, have the pen in hand, eye contact. So, the last piece. If you get asked a question that you don't have an answer to, be honest. Don't try to make up an answer. Don't try to, because it's so obvious, right? I think we all. So, if they ask you something about the profession or something that you didn't think about or didn't prepare for, just be honest. Say, to tell you the truth, I didn't think about that question or I have no experience in that. But then if it's something that has to do with your work, something you presented, and it's something that you didn't rehearse, say that, but then try to share your thought process, right? Think of it as an assignment that they're giving you and on the job. So you're asked to respond to something, come up with an answer. Well, I don't know the answer, but I would probably go through these channels to get to the answer, right?
Yeah.
So try to share the thought process.
Yep.
Good listener. I think this is easier said than done. Especially when we're kind of nervous and at the notepad. This is why the pen and the notepad really helps,
Yeah.
because sometimes when you're kind of flustered and nervous, you hear it and you were listening, but you forget, right? So that, so active listening is
Yeah.
something that if you can demonstrate that during the interview, they can imagine you doing that once you're hired.
Yep.
That has to do with a lot of the things that Mimi touched on, which is repeating back what they said. So if you're given like a especially sensitive or important set of instructions, repeating back what you think you heard, right? Or asking questions, follow-up questions that relate to that, right? Those are all two examples of really showing your active listening skills. So in other words, don't just think about, okay, what am I going to say next, or how am I going to talk about this? Actually listen to them in conversation.
Right, and using that tool is the way that you engage with that person or that group that's interviewing you, because it says that you are not only listening, you want to engage with them, and that also makes you memorable. And sometimes it's always, I always say that you have to be who you are, so that what you write down may then strike a chord that then allows for you to naturally ask that question without being so prescriptive before you walk in. So that thing of being spontaneous, because you see in your own notes something that you can then engage, which is actually what Karen's now said, Mimi said it earlier. That engagement is then what makes you connect with the individual.
Okay, so we covered this. So this is an article I found about small talk. So similar to this, tell me about yourself. So you want to edit and filter, right?
Yeah.
So even if you're walking to the room and you're just exchanging pleasantries, small talk, just again be mindful. Why are you here? Why are they there? What is this? So don't actually practice making small talk without revealing too much detail that is inappropriate or will get you into trouble. Okay, I thought this was a good one. So, sorry, if it's hard to see, the quote says, "I'm not always concerned with your actual answer, but rather your composure," which means, so when we don't know the answer to something, we all get nervous. But with more practice and confidence, we can stay composed, right? Composure and thinking process when answering it, right? So think about that. Sample interview questions. I selected some. I'm not going to. Let's not go through all of them. But these are the places where I got them from. Things like, why should I hire you? What is your long-range objective? Are you a team player? So, oh, by the way, so something like that is not a yes or no question, right? So don't just say yes, but elaborate with examples.
Yeah.
Weakness, strengths. I think this is really interesting. So you may, if they don't ask for this, you may offer this in the way that you talk about as another way to make yourself memorable. So again, you have to rehearse, right? You can't do it. This is hard. This is something. So by the way, all of these questions would be really hard to do on the spot without preparation, right? So think about whether it's in the context of a previous internship experience or a project, something at school, something in your personal life, but still related to the profession. You know, some kind of a struggle or conflict, hardship that you overcame to show your resilience and problem-solving skills. Oh, this was also interesting. I think this is, even if you don't get this question, I think it's a really good thing to have reflected on to, again, exude that confidence in your body posture. So somebody who you trust, somebody who knows you well, like somebody like Yim, let's say, what would Yim say, you know, in her reference letter, or let's say they get a phone call, you know, because you listed her as a reference. What are the good qualities that she would say to them about you, right? And so again, like these are not, so you don't have to worry about, oh, am I being modest, immodest, is it true or not true? It's somebody's objective opinion of, you know, somebody who's gotten to know you over the years. This is what they see in me. This is what the strengths that they would promote in me. Really believe it and hear the words and let that confidence come through in your body posture, especially when you negotiate your salary. And then some other examples of questions. So failure, success, these are always good ones. So these are some examples of questions that you would then ask them at the end of the process. So you've gone through your portfolio, they've told you about some of their practice, their firm, some sample questions about what you could ask them. So starting with the bigger picture, so they may tell you the person might be like mired in the day-to-day details. But every firm has a mission statement, and you would know this because you've done the research. But it's I think it's also interesting to hear from somebody who's actively in the office, all the way down to most firms, even small firms, they have some kind of a charity, volunteer work. Either they do it as a group effort, or they make it possible for the employees to go and do that. And I think finding out whether or not they do this and what are the kinds of projects that they do is a really good indicator of the culture in the office, right? What do they value? How do they encourage employees to not only be productive for their clients and in terms of their billing rates, but there are other important values also outside of your billing rates and your billable hours. So to the extent that you feel it's relevant, so sometimes in a larger firm, you're interviewing with not the principal, the partner of the firm, but somebody below them who report to them. And so you could ask them about their own personal, right? So they've gone through the same process you have, at some point, and they may be thinking of leaving. You never know, right? So it's something that if you feel like you've established the personal connection, you can ask, ask them to share their personal experiences about the things that they personally appreciate, they personally wish were different. Okay, after the interview, thank you emails. If not, if it was at the end of the day, then the next day. So the thank you email should not just be a thank you, but it's another opportunity for you to remind them, this is who I was, and I was really intrigued or excited, enthusiastic about this thing I learned that you told me about, right? So it's another opportunity to highlight.
Yeah.
Very appropriate to send LinkedIn invites, whether or not you get the offer. So meaning that I think shows you the profession. We'll say like it's a small world, it's a small community. So let's say the interview, they found somebody else and hired a different candidate. You might come across this person in a different firm, or that you might get hired 2 years later for something else. You just never know. So establishing that professional connection through LinkedIn isn't dependent on whether or not you get hired. Yeah, assuming that you did you did a good job, good enough of a job at the interview. Okay. Maybe we'll kind of think about spend a little bit. I think oftentimes, because I think it's to some degree, all architects are perfectionists. We're the hardest critics on our own work. And I think it's especially true for students. So, you know, when you present your work, you might see all the ways, different little ways that it could have been better. Like I could have made this layout better, the project better, the cover letter, whatever. But during the interview, don't go into that mode. Right? So don't apologize. Don't be defensive. Don't apologize don't say things like, oh, I'm sorry, the text is too small. You know, well, I didn't, you know, so, oh, you know, you're missing a label, you're missing a typo, or why the plan looks incomplete. Well, we didn't have enough time. Like, don't do that, right? So it's not professional and it's immature. So the best recourse is, you know, catch the typo, fix the typo, you know, rework the drawings, make the text big enough so that you can read. But you know, so if something you know fell out of your attention, you didn't quite fix it, then you know look for other places where the information could be gleaned, right? But don't take it as a personal attack that you have to then apologize for. The handshake. I think this is I think tricky, being yourself, but you have to be yourself. I think it's tricky because you know I think it's natural to be tentative or hesitant because you don't yet know yourself as an architect in the profession. You're new to it, right? So there are many things that you're curious about, you're unsure about. So you feel yourself not tested. Right, but at the same, so you know that which means that you're open-minded, you're ready to learn, you're ready. So that's the humble. But it's also, I think what you can trust is that you had the passion and the commitment to change majors or to commit to the number of years it takes to get this degree, to do all this work, to put together your portfolio and be in front of that person. That's real and authentic, and that's something to be proud of, right? And so kind of learn to, again, rehearse it in the tone of your voice and the words that you choose to balance the two so that you're fully committed and fully you know, proud of the work that you've put into it while knowing that I'm new to this and I'm going to have to learn a lot.
Yeah,
right?
I think that word rehearse is really important because a lot of you are international students. And even just yesterday in class, one of my students said to me, well, my English isn't that great, Yim, and I don't know how to present myself. So one suggestion also is that you should be listening to either other presentations or talks so that you hear how other people present. Like TED Talks are perfect because there's a dialogue, or someone like Fresh Air where Terry Gross has a question and then someone else is responding, so that you're building a presence for how you speak. And that's really what this particular student was saying to me is, I'm speaking, but it's really about the presentation of myself. And that's why I told him, don't be so self-conscious. The most important thing is to practice and rehearse constantly. Yeah.
And I think, so you know, the language, you know, so if you're not confident about your language skills, it doesn't mean, so you didn't preclude yourself from applying for the job because you meet other qualifications. So maybe it's natural that you feel, you know, less confident about your language skills, but you should never, you know, make a statement like that in front of the interviewer.
Right.
And I think you should also find, you know, so I think all of us, you know, maybe can recognize if somebody's fluent in a language or very articulate. But there are other ways to communicate, and it isn't, the fluency in a language is not the only communication skills, right? And so I think all of you will find that maybe there are certain topics that, you know, where you lack the vocabulary or practice, but when it comes to your work, you're all super fluent. You've thought about it for years and years, right? And you've said it to audiences outside of yourself for weeks and weeks, right? So have confidence in that, and don't let yourself off the hook by saying things like, well, it's not my first language, so, you know, don't do that. You have no excuse, right? So there are many resources online, so these are snippets of several, but a lot of this kind of encapsulates. So this is the final session in this room. So these are highlights of all of the previous 4 sessions. from another source. So we won't go through this. We can make the slides available to you guys. I know there was a lot of kind of, interview question lists and things like that were here.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.